The clinking of silver on porcelain was the only sound that dared to compete with the low, confident murmur of Sheikh Jamal Al-Fahim's voice. He sat opposite his business partner, Omar Khalid, in the most exclusive restaurant in the city, a place where the air itself seemed to be filtered through wealth. Both men were dressed in immaculate white thobes and gutras, their traditional attire a striking statement of power amidst the sea of dark Western suits. They spoke in the easy, rhythmic cadence of their native Arabic, discussing a multi-billion-dollar deal with the same casualness others might use to discuss the weather. The waitress, a young woman whose name tag read Chloe, moved with a quiet efficiency that was designed to make her invisible. She refilled their water, cleared a plate, and was about to retreat when Omar leaned forward, a glint of cruel amusement in his eyes. He said something to Jamal in Arabic, his lips curving into a smirk. Jamal initially waved it off, but Omar persisted, his whisper a goad. Finally, Jamal sighed, a flicker of theatrical reluctance on his face, and turned his gaze to Chloe. Her posture was ramrod straight, her expression neutral, but she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. She was no longer invisible. She was the target. "Young lady," Jamal began, his English perfect but accented. He gestured around the opulent room. "You see all this? This world of finance, of immense wealth. It is a complex game." Chloe simply nodded, her hands clasped behind her back. "My friend Omar here and we have a small disagreement. A simple matter of a new acquisition. He believes the risk is hedged. I am not so sure." He paused, letting the moment hang in the air. Omar watched her, his eyes cold and mocking. He was enjoying this. "So, tell me," Jamal said, his voice now carrying a clear note of condescension. "You, a waitress in this fine establishment. What is your financial advice for us?" The question landed with a soft thud, an act of casual public humiliation. It was a joke meant for them at her expense. A few diners at a nearby table glanced over, sensing the microdrama. Chloe didn't blush. She didn't stammer or look away. For a full 5 seconds, she said nothing. She simply held Sheikh Jamal's gaze, and then, for a brief moment, she let her eyes drift to Omar Khalid. In that fleeting glance, there was a universe of something that was not deference. It was recognition. Then she looked back at Jamal. Her voice, when it came, was low, clear, and utterly devoid of the tremor they expected. "Your concern is not the hedge," she said. Her tone as crisp as a freshly printed stock certificate. "It's the underlying asset valuation." Apex Global's recent acquisition of the SynthLogic patent portfolio was priced using a discounted cash flow model that failed to account for the sector's regulatory crosswinds in East Asia. The hedge is irrelevant if the asset itself is a ghost. The room, which had been a low hum of activity, seemed to fall utterly silent. The clinking of silver stopped. Omar's smirk froze on his face, then melted away, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. Sheikh Jamal's hand, which had been reaching for his water glass, stopped mid-air. He stared at the 20-year-old waitress as if she had just sprouted wings. Her words were not just intelligent. They were surgically precise, a high-level critique that even his own senior analysts might have missed. He had asked for financial advice as a joke. He had expected a nervous giggle or a confused apology. He had not expected a scalpel. Chloe's life had not always been a cycle of clearing tables and forcing polite smiles. 4 years ago, she was not Chloe the waitress but Chloe Stanton, the prodigy. She had been on a full scholarship at a top-tier university, devouring texts on quantitative analysis and market theory. Her mind was a finely tuned machine for numbers and patterns, and her professors spoke of her future in hushed, reverent tones. She was destined for Wall Street, for London, for the gleaming towers where the world's wealth was traded in milliseconds. Her father, David Stanton, was her hero. He was a brilliant engineer who had built a small but innovative tech firm from the ground up. His company, Innovate Dynamics, was his life's work, a testament to late nights, relentless passion, and ethical business practices. He had developed a proprietary form of machine learning software that was poised to revolutionize the logistics industry. Then, Apex Global arrived. They were a corporate behemoth, a shark that swam in the deep waters of international commerce, and they wanted her father's technology. David refused their initial offers, wanting to grow his company independently. But Apex Global didn't take no for an answer. The man leading the hostile takeover was a rising star in their acquisitions department, a man known for his ruthlessness and his charm, a man named Omar Khalid. He used every dirty trick in the corporate playbook. He initiated a proxy fight, spread malicious rumors to drive down Innovate Dynamics' stock price, and buried her father in frivolous lawsuits designed to bleed him dry. The final blow was a masterfully executed maneuver involving shell companies and manipulated debt instruments that forced a sale. It was technically legal, a work of predatory genius. Omar Khalid bought her father's life's work for pennies on the dollar. The day the company was sold, David Stanton had a massive heart attack in his office. He survived, but a part of him did not. The stress and the betrayal broke his spirit, leaving him a shadow of the vibrant man he once was. Their family lost everything. The savings, the house, Chloe's college fund, it all evaporated. Chloe dropped out of university to take care of her parents, her dreams of a financial career turning to ash. She took the first job she could get, serving food to people who lived in the world she was supposed to inherit. For 2 years, she had worn the uniform, carried the trays, and endured the casual condescension of the wealthy. But she had never forgotten. At night, after her shifts, she didn't sleep. She went to the public library and used their computers, her mind, once filled with academic theories, now focused on a single target: Omar Khalid. She tracked his career, his deals, his every public move. She dissected his acquisitions, searching for the signature of his particular brand of predatory finance. She knew he was dirty. She knew his methods were built on a foundation of rot. All she needed was a chance, a single crack in his perfect, polished facade. And then, tonight, fate had walked into her section. It wasn't just a sheik and his partner. It was Justice sitting at table 7, asking for a water refill. And when he had turned to her with that joke, that casual, arrogant dismissal, she felt not humiliation, but the click of a lock falling into place. It was the opening she had spent 2 years praying for. Back at the table, the silence stretched into an eternity. Omar was the first to recover, forcing a hollow laugh. "A lucky guess," he said, waving a dismissive hand, his voice a little too loud. "She must have read a headline somewhere. It's a popular topic for amateur bloggers." He was trying to reclaim control, to paint her as a parrot, not a prophet. But Sheikh Jamal wasn't looking at Omar. His eyes were locked on Chloe, searching her face for any sign of deceit, of luck, of anything other than the profound, unnerving confidence she projected. He saw none. He saw only the calm of absolute certainty. He had built an empire on his ability to read people, to distinguish substance from smoke, and the young woman standing before him was pure substance. He had seen that look before in the eyes of battle-hardened hedge fund managers and brilliant quants who could see the future in strings of code. He had never seen it in a waitress. "The regulatory headwinds I mentioned," Chloe continued, her voice level, cutting through Omar's blustering, "are not public knowledge. They're being discussed in closed-door sessions in Shanghai. The only way you'd know about them is if you had deep contacts in the Ministry of Industry or if you'd done a proper deep-dive risk analysis, which Apex's public filings prove they did not. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Omar's defense. She wasn't repeating headlines. She was quoting from a book that hadn't even been written yet. Omar's face tightened, a flicker of genuine panic in his eyes before he masked it with anger. "This is absurd, Jamal. Are you really going to listen to this girl? She's nobody," but Jamal had heard enough. He held up a hand, silencing his partner. He still didn't understand what was happening, but he knew it was significant. This was not a random event. There was a story here, a secret hidden behind a cheap name tag and a weary expression. He made a decision, the kind of swift, intuitive leap that had made him a billionaire. He reached into the inner pocket of his thobe, produced a sleek, black wallet, and extracted a business card. It was heavy, made of metal, his name etched in both Arabic and English. He slid it across the table toward Chloe. "My office," he said. his voice now stripped of all condescension. It was pure command. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Be prepared to prove every word you've just said. Chloe looked at the card, then back at him. She gave a single, sharp nod. I will. She picked up the card, her fingers closing around the cool metal. Felt heavier than a tray full of plates. Felt like a weapon. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her back straight, leaving two of the most powerful men in the room staring after her in a state of suspended shock. The joke was over. The next morning, Chloe stood before a colossal tower of glass and steel that clawed at the sky, the headquarters of Al Fahim capital. It was a monument to power, designed to make anyone who entered feel small and insignificant. Her waitress uniform was gone, replaced by the best professional outfit she could assemble from a thrift store. A simple black blazer and slacks, clean and pressed, but a world away from the bespoke suits that glided through the lobby. The air inside was cool and smelled of money and ambition. The receptionist, a woman with a perfectly sculpted face and a dismissive air, looked down her nose at Chloe's name. You can have a seat, she said, her tone suggesting Chloe should be grateful for the privilege. For 20 minutes, Chloe sat on a leather couch, watching the river of influence flow past her. Men and women with sharp eyes and anxious energy hurried by, speaking in hushed tones about markets and mergers. They were the people she was supposed to have become. The thought didn't sting as much as it used to. Today, she wasn't here to join them. She was here to hunt. Finally, a severe-looking assistant appeared and led her not to an office, but to the main boardroom. The room was vast, dominated by a long, polished obsidian table that reflected the panoramic city view like a dark lake. Sheikh Jamal sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. To his right sat Omar Khalid, who now looked composed, his earlier panic replaced by a cold, predatory confidence. He had spent the night preparing for this, marshalling his defenses. He was back in his element and he was ready for war. Flanking them were three other men, older, with the hardened, skeptical faces of senior executives who had seen and heard everything. They were Jamal's inner circle, his lieutenants, and their gazes raked over Chloe with undisguised doubt. This was the lion's den. The stage had been set not for a conversation, but for an execution. Omar had clearly framed this as an indulgence, a moment to humor the Sheikh's bizarre whim before getting back to business. He intended to tear her apart, to expose her as a fraud, and to re-establish his dominance. Chloe felt a tremor of fear, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. The sheer weight of power in the room was suffocating. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But then she pictured her father's face, the light gone from his eyes, and the fear solidified into something else, something hard and sharp. She walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table, pulled it out and sat down, her movements calm and deliberate. She placed her worn leather satchel on the table. The battle had begun. Thank you for joining us, Miss Stanton. Omar began, seizing control of the meeting before Jamal could speak. He smiled, but it was the baring of teeth, not an expression of welcome. We are all very eager to hear more of your unique insights. The sarcasm was thick enough to taste. He gestured to a massive screen that covered one wall of the boardroom. With a tap on his tablet, a complex series of charts and data streams appeared. It was a projection model for a different company, a new venture in the energy sector. It was dense, technical, and deliberately obscure. This is a model for a potential investment we're considering, Omar said smoothly, his eyes twinkling with malice. A bit more complex than the restaurant business, I'm afraid. But since you are so gifted, perhaps you could enlighten us. Point out its weaknesses. Show my team what they've missed. It was a classic ambush. He had switched the topic, throwing an impossible problem at her, expecting her to flounder and expose herself as a one-trick pony who had gotten lucky with a single piece of information. The other executives leaned back in their chairs, a few of them exchanging knowing glances. They were here for the show. The waitress was about to be put in her place. Sheikh Jamal remained silent, his face a stony mask. He was watching, testing. He had given her the opportunity. It was up to her to survive the trial. Chloe looked at the screen, her eyes scanning the dizzying array of figures. For a moment, she felt a surge of the old classroom anxiety, the pressure of a pop quiz she hadn't studied for. But then her mind kicked in. The patterns, the numbers, the hidden assumptions, they began to arrange themselves into a language she understood better than English. She stood up and walked toward the screen, her worn shoes silent on the plush carpet. She picked up a digital stylus from the console. The room was so quiet she could hear the faint hum of the servers in the walls. She didn't just point out a weakness. She systematically dismantled Omar's entire model piece by piece. "Your weighted average cost of capital is too low," she began, her voice steady and clear. "You've based it on outdated treasury bond yields and haven't factored in the geopolitical risk premium for sourcing cobalt from the DRC. She circled the figure on the screen. "Here, your depreciation schedule for the drilling equipment is based on a linear model. But this type of deep-sea rig has an accelerated degradation curve. The maintenance costs will gut your margins in year 4, not year 7. She slashed a red line through the projection. "And most importantly," she said, turning to face them, her eyes burning with intensity, "your entire revenue projection is contingent on a single government subsidy that is currently under legislative review. There's a 60% chance it will be repealed before Phase 2 of the project even begins. Your model doesn't account for that possibility at all." She put down the stylus. "This isn't an investment," she concluded, her voice ringing with authority. "It's a black hole." The boardroom was stunned into silence. The executives were no longer leaning back. They were on the edge of their seats, staring first at the screen, now covered in her corrections, and then at her. They had not just seen a lucky guess. They had just witnessed a masterclass. Omar's face was ashen. He had built a trap, and she had turned it into her throne. Sheikh Jamal's expression finally broke. A slow, deep flicker of profound respect lit his eyes. He raised a hand. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of command, "please leave us. I wish to speak with Miss Stanton alone." The executives, including a visibly shaken Omar, filed out of the room without a word. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Chloe and the Sheikh alone in the cavernous space. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't tense. It was charged with significance. Jamal gestured for her to take a seat closer to him at the head of the table. "That was impressive," he said, the understatement of the year. "Now, I believe it is time you tell me who you really are. Not the name on your tag, but the mind that just humiliated my entire acquisitions team." Chloe took a deep breath. The time for hiding was over. She told him everything. She spoke not with emotion, but with the cold, hard precision of a legal brief. She told him about her father, David Stanton, and his company, Innovate Dynamics. She told him about her studies, her scholarship, and the future that had been stolen from her. And then, she laid the final, damning card on the table. She told him about the man who had orchestrated it all, who had built his career at Apex Global on the wreckage of her family's life. Omar Khalid. "For the past 2 years," she explained, her voice low and intense, "I haven't just been serving coffee. I've been studying him. I analyzed the Innovate Dynamics takeover until I understood every predatory move he made. And then I started looking for the same pattern in his other deals. Especially the deals he made after becoming your partner." Jamal listened, his face impassive, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the arm of his chair. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "I found a ghost," Chloe said. "A network of shell corporations, registered in untraceable jurisdictions. He uses them to skim money from your joint ventures. When you acquire a company, he uses a separate shell entity he controls to buy up the company's debt for pennies on the dollar right before the deal is announced. Then, your joint venture pays off that debt at full value, and the money disappears into his pocket. The Apex Global acquisition you mentioned at the restaurant? That was the biggest one yet. He didn't just miscalculate the risk. He inflated the value of the asset to hide the millions he was siphoning off to himself." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "I don't have the smoking gun yet." The final proof is buried deep inside your own servers, protected by layers of encryption. But I know it's there. I know how he thinks. I know where he would hide it. Jamal sat back, the information washing over him. The accusation was monstrous. Omar was not just a partner. He was a friend, a man he had known and trusted for over a decade. To believe this young woman meant accepting a betrayal of the highest order. And yet, her story fit together with a terrifying logic. It explained small inconsistencies he had noticed over the years, deals that had underperformed for no apparent reason, profits that had mysteriously shrunk. His trust was warring with his instinct, and his instinct was screaming that she was telling the truth. But he was a man who operated on proof, not instinct. If what you say is true, he said slowly, you are asking me to risk a partnership worth billions on your word. I'm not asking you to trust my word, Chloe replied instantly. I'm asking you to let me prove it. He studied her for a long time, the city skyline reflected in his dark eyes. He saw the fire in her, the unbending will of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. He made another one of his signature, life-altering decisions. You will have your chance, he declared. He summoned his head of security, a formidable, silent man named Ferris, whose loyalty to Jamal was absolute. Miss Stanton will be given access to our internal network, a sandbox terminal in this room. Ferris, you will not leave her side. You will monitor her every keystroke. She will not eat. She will not sleep until she finds what she is looking for or until 24 hours have passed. If she accesses anything outside the agreed-upon servers, you will remove her from the building. Am I clear? Ferris gave a curt nod. It was a test of faith, but one wrapped in chains. She was being given the keys to the kingdom, but with a guard standing at the gate, ready to execute her if she made a single misstep. Later that day, as Chloe was immersed in a sea of data, the boardroom door opened. It was Omar. He had clearly found out about Jamal's directive. He dismissed Ferris with a wave of his hand, and the security head, after a brief, questioning look at Chloe, retreated to the hallway. The charismatic mask Omar wore in public was completely gone. His face was a thundercloud of cold, controlled rage. I don't know what game you think you're playing, he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. But you are far out of your league. You are a child meddling in things you cannot possibly comprehend. He took a step closer, his presence filling the space, radiating menace. This is your one and only warning. Walk out of this building right now. Forget you ever met us. Disappear. If you do, I will let this go. If you don't. He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but perfectly understood. Chloe looked up from the screen, her eyes red-rimmed from hours of staring at code. She felt a chill of genuine fear. He wasn't just a corporate shark. There was something truly dangerous behind his eyes. But her fear was an old friend. She had lived with it for 2 years. It was you, wasn't it? She said, her voice quiet but unshakable. The flowers you sent to my mother after my father's heart attack. The card said, deepest sympathies from Apex Global. That was you. Omar's composure cracked. A flicker of surprise, of being caught off guard, crossed his face. He had intended that gesture to be the final twist of the knife, an act of supreme, untouchable arrogance. You should have walked away from my father's company, Mr. Khalid, Chloe said, turning back to the screen. It's far too late for me to walk away now. The hours bled into one another. The city lights outside the panoramic window blurred into a glittering tapestry as night fell and then gave way to the gray dawn. Chloe worked with a feverish intensity, fueled by coffee, adrenaline, and the burning memory of her father's broken spirit. Ferris watched her from his corner, a silent, unmoving statue. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, executing complex search algorithms, peeling back layers of encryption. She was chasing Omar's ghost through a digital labyrinth, hitting dead end after dead end. Doubt began to creep in. What if she was wrong? What if he was too smart, had covered his tracks too well? The 24-hour deadline was approaching. She had less than an hour left. Despair was beginning to set in when she saw it. An anomaly. A single encrypted file in a server partition that was mislabeled as legacy marketing data. It was designed to be ignored, a needle in a digital haystack. But the encryption was too strong for a simple marketing file. Her heart began to pound. She tried dozens of decryption keys, all failing. Time was running out. She closed her eyes, thinking, trying to get inside Omar's head. What would he use? Something personal, something meaningful only to him. Arrogance. His defining trait. He would see his victory as a work of art. Her eyes snapped open. She typed in a new key, a date. The date of the hostile takeover of Innovate Dynamics. October 26, 2019. She hit enter. The file unlocked. A ledger appeared on the screen. It was all there. A meticulous shadow account book detailing every fraudulent transaction, every skimmed percentage, every payment laundered through his network of shell corporations. Millions upon millions of dollars, stolen from his partnership with Jamal. It was a monument to his greed, and he had signed it with the date of his greatest triumph, the day he had destroyed her family. At precisely 9 a.m., Jamal called an emergency meeting with his core team. Omar strode in, looking rested and confident. He shot Chloe a look of pure contempt. He believed she had failed, that her time was up. He was ready to deliver the killing blow, to have her thrown out as the delusional charlatan he knew she was. "Well, Jamal," Omar said with a theatrical sigh, "has your little experiment concluded? Can we finally get back to running our multi-billion-dollar enterprise?" Sheikh Jamal said nothing. He simply nodded to Chloe. "Miss Stanton, you have the floor." Omar actually laughed. A short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Oh, for heaven's sake, are we still entertaining this fantasy?" Chloe didn't say a word. She stood, connected her laptop to the boardroom's main projector, and with a single click, threw the ledger onto the massive screen. The room fell into a silence so profound it was like a physical blow. Every eye was fixed on the damning numbers, the list of shell companies, the dates, the illicit transfers. And at the bottom of it all, a summary of funds embezzled, a figure so large it was difficult to comprehend. The blood drained from Omar's face. The color vanished, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of horror. He stared at the screen, at his own secret history laid bare for the world to see, and in that moment he knew he was finished. The swagger, the confidence, the charisma. It all evaporated, leaving only a hollowed-out man facing his own ruin. The downfall was as swift as it was brutal. Sheikh Jamal rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate, but his eyes were blazing with the cold fire of profound betrayal. He looked at the man he had called a friend for over a decade, and he saw nothing but a parasite. "Omar," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, yet it carried across the silent boardroom like a death sentence. "Our partnership, our friendship, everything we have ever built together. It is over." He pointed a single, trembling finger toward the door. Security, 2 guards, who had been waiting outside, entered the room. "Escort Mr. Khalid from my building. Freeze every asset connected to his name within our joint ventures. Block his access to all accounts, all properties, all communications. He is to leave with nothing but the clothes on his back. He is no longer welcome here. He is no longer anyone." Omar, completely broken, didn't even protest. He allowed the guards to take him by the arms, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a defeated actor. As they led him away, his eyes met Chloe's one last time. There was no anger left, only a vast, empty well of disbelief. He, Omar Khalid, had been undone by a waitress. The boardroom erupted into controlled chaos. The other executives, shocked out of their stupor, were on their phones, activating legal teams, crisis managers, and financial controllers. The process of surgically removing Omar from the company had begun. It would be a messy, complicated affair that would dominate the financial news for months. Headlines flashed across an imagined screen. Billionaire tycoon Omar Khalid accused of monumental fraud. Al Fahim Capital severs ties with longtime partner. The waitress who brought down an empire. The story was too cinematic to be ignored. Chloe stood alone amidst the whirlwind, the adrenaline slowly draining from her. leaving a profound sense of exhaustion in its wake. She had done it. She had avenged her father. She had reclaimed her family's honor. The ghost that had haunted her for 2 years had finally been exorcised. But the victory felt different than she had imagined. It wasn't a burst of triumphant joy. It was a quiet, somber satisfaction, heavy with the weight of the journey it had taken to get there. Justice had been served, but the cost had been immense. Later that evening, long after the chaos had subsided, Sheikh Jamal summoned Chloe back to his private office. The boardroom, the scene of her trial and triumph, was dark and empty. His office was a sanctuary of quiet power, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the city's glittering expanse. He gestured for her to sit in a leather chair opposite his desk. For a long time, he just looked at her, a complex mixture of awe, gratitude, and regret in his eyes. "I misjudged you," he said finally, his voice raw with sincerity. "That is a mistake I do not make often. I brought a viper into my house, and I was too blind to see it. You saw it from the outside. You saved my company from ruin. I am in your debt. You gave me the chance to prove it," Chloe replied quietly. "That's more than anyone else would have done." Jamal nodded, accepting this. "A debt must be repaid. I could offer you money, a reward that would ensure you and your family are comfortable for the rest of your lives." He paused. "But I suspect that would be an insult to you. A mind like yours does not belong on the sidelines. It belongs in the game." He leaned forward, his proposition clear and direct. "Omar created a vulnerability in my company. I need someone to ensure it never happens again. I am creating a new division, strategic risk and forensic analysis. It will answer directly to me. It will have unlimited resources and the authority to investigate any corner of my enterprise. I want you to build it. I want you to run it." It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams, a restoration of the future that had been stolen from her, and then some. She was being handed the keys to the kingdom, not as a guest under guard, but as its new protector. She accepted. The final scene of her old life was trading in her worn-out waitress shoes for a keycard that granted her access to the highest levels of power. Weeks later, Chloe stood in her own new office, just down the hall from Jamal's. The view was the same. She was no longer looking up at the tower. She was looking out from it. She was leading a team of the brightest analysts in the industry, the very kind of people who would have once looked down on her. Now they looked to her for guidance, their respect earned not by a degree from a prestigious university, but by an intelligence that had been forged in the fires of adversity. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. It contained a single image, the old, simple logo of her father's company, Innovate Dynamics. Beneath it, a short message. "He would be so proud, Chloe. He is finally at peace." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release. The victory was complete. It wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning. It was the restoration of a name, the healing of a family, and the birth of a new legacy. The world had tried to make her invisible, a footnote in another man's story of success. But she had refused to be erased. She had picked up a weapon disguised as a joke and rewritten her own ending. And as she looked out at the endless city lights, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning.